Thank you, Nairi. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to Aunty Matilda and to your elders past and present, and particularly those present with us today. I'd like to acknowledge distinguished guests, the Prime Minister, Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Bill Shorten, Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Nigel Scullion, Minister for Indigenous Health, the Honourable Ken Wyatt, West Australian Senator Pat Dodson, Northern Territory Senator Malandiri McCarthy, Member for Barton, the Honourable Linda Burney, and Professor Mick Dodson, and all other politicians and senior members of departments who've taken time out of their diaries to attend this important occasion. But I'd like to especially welcome and thank the many Stolen Generation members who've travelled from far afield to be here today. Your presence attests to the importance of this commemorative event, and today's call for urgent action to finally continue the work that began 20 years ago, to repair the damage caused by one of Australia's most tragic historical episodes. The Healing Foundation's report, written by Pat Anderson and Edward Tilton, and informed by our Stolen Generations Reference Committee, sets out a comprehensive agenda for long-term and holistic change. It's our hope that we can work with the federal government to implement these reforms, which reflect the intent and purpose of the 1997 Bringing Them Home report. The impact of unresolved trauma, originally caused by forcibly removing tens of thousands of children from their family, community and cultures, has caused a flow-on effect into current generations. The research clearly shows a link between 2 decades of inaction and many of the social and health problems in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities today. It's common sense that these issues that have developed over a long period of time will take a long time to fix. We therefore need a commitment to the job ahead. We can't afford to keep cherry-picking easy wins without putting the framework in place for sustainable outcomes. But we live in a complex world, full of competing priorities and finite resources, so long-term change often needs to be addressed one step at a time. To that end, the Healing Foundation has identified 4 key priorities as stage 1 of a coordinated and holistic framework. They are practical initiatives and easy to implement, which will give us a great head start on the full journey that needs to be made. We all know that with long journeys, the right investment at the start will ultimately save us time, energy and money down the track. We're shining the light on a pretty dim picture here today, but it doesn't need to be a bleak future. Over the past 7 years, the Healing Foundation has shown that with the right services in place, supported by the right community and government partnerships, and with the right level of resources, we can heal the damage and disrupt the negative cycle. Independent reviews of our healing programs show they can lead to less domestic violence, less contact with police, and a safer community. But we're just scratching the surface. To achieve the long-term outcomes we all want, we need to scale up our approach and build an equitable and evidence-based framework, which is why we've chosen 4 key priorities to start the journey. Our first priority, a comprehensive needs analysis so that we can tailor and deliver more effective services for stolen generations that also represents the best possible return on investment. Right now, we don't know how many stolen generation members are still alive, let alone the demographic data that would enable us to optimise service design and delivery. What we do know is that 20 years on, their needs have changed because they're an ageing population with specific aged care requirements. Why is this important? Can you imagine the fear you might feel at the prospect of going into a large aged care facility if you were carrying the scars of sexual, physical and emotional abuse from a childhood spent in an institution? We all need to do better for the stolen generations, and as a starting point, we need to know more about their needs. Our second priority, a national scheme for reparations to ensure equal access to financial redress and culturally appropriate healing services. This is not dissimilar to the scheme recently announced in the 2017 budget for sexual abuse survivors, except our work has shown that Western methods are not always the most successful in treating mental health and other trauma-related issues in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. We need to focus on the services that the stolen generations have told us they need, such as collective healing and cultural approaches, where people are supported throughout their healing journey. We've recently seen 2 state governments introduce reparation schemes for stolen generations, which suggests support for a national scheme that would be fairer for all Australians. Our third priority, coordinated and compulsory training around stolen generations trauma, so that the people working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities are better equipped to provide effective and appropriate services. The right training for our workforce can make a substantial difference. We need to give everyone the skills to effectively deal with trauma-related issues, whether it's police or frontline social workers or reception staff to the CEO of key service provider organisations. Our fourth and final priority, a comprehensive study of intergenerational trauma and how we can effectively tackle it. This is absolutely essential to our efforts to address not just one, but every major health and social problem in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities today. Effective healing measures to deal with intergenerational trauma need to be at the centre of every future strategy, whether it's to minimise suicide, incarceration rates, or the high numbers of children entering the protection system. Now, we're not the only ones talking about this. Many of the experts giving evidence to the ongoing Royal Commission in the Northern Territory have also talked about the need to address intergenerational trauma as a fundamental key. So thank you, Prime Minister, for your comments today and your undertaking to give this report the consideration it needs and deserves, because we can't afford to fail our stolen generations again. We've got to break the trauma cycle for their sake and for the sake of their families and for the sake of every Australian. Thank you.